All right, we
Hello.
are live.
All right, we're on. Well, welcome everyone to KLC's webinar on Ask the Experts, CMMC Level 2 Final Rule. My name is Kelly McDermott, and I work with KLC Consulting along with Kyle Lai and Layla Paoletti. And we want to thank you for joining us today, this very informational webinar. So there's a few things I'd like to share. First, about KLC Consulting. As many of you know, KLC Consulting is an authorized CMMC third-party assessment organization, and we focus on CMMC Level 2 certification and consulting services. So a little bit about us, and I believe we're going to be showing just a little bit more here. We were incorporated in 2002. And we have offices in Marlborough, Massachusetts and Houston, Texas, but we service across the United States. So we're really excited today to have you all. I know that there are a lot of pressing questions, and we thank you in advance for submitting your questions. We'll try to get to as many of those as we can toward the end of the seminar. And if you have questions along the way, please feel free to put them in the Q&A down on the lower toolbar here. And again, we'll try to get to as many as possible. You should receive on this QR code, you'll see here, you can visit our assessment page and sign up for your assessment. And also you'll get the recording for the webinar and a downloadable toolkit on what to expect during your CMMC assessment. So those will all be made available to you through a QR code at the end of the webinar. And so now I would like to kick off the webinar with introducing Kyle Lai and Layla Paoletti. Kyle is the president and CISO of KLC Consulting, and Layla Paoletti, of course, is our director of cybersecurity services. So welcome, Kyle and Layla.
Hi, Kelly. How are you?
Hi, Kelly. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar. So today we are going to go through the questions, and before we go through the questions, I just want to cover the CMMC rules 32 CFR and the 48 CFR, because we get a lot of questions in terms of like why are there two separate CFRs rules. But before we go through that, there are a lot of acronyms, so I'm not going to go through them, but if you email us, we will send you a copy of this slide. Both Layla and myself, we are CMMC certified assessors, and we'll be lead assessors, so qualify as a lead assessor. So yeah, I just want to throw it out there so you're getting some good information from us. Okay, so why are there two CMMC rules? So one of them is CMMC program rules. That's for the ecosystem, talking about DIB organizations, the organizations seeking assessments, certifications, and also the C3POs and how do we form the C3POs, but most importantly, right, how the DoD and also accreditation body, how do you get the certification? How do you go through the assessments? That's what's described in the 32 CFR Part 170, right? And then there is 48 CFR Part 204 or 48 CFR. That's a CMMC acquisition rule. That is really designed for the DoD contracting officers and what they need to do when they issue the contracts, what languages they need to include in those contracts. So just want to make sure that you have understanding why there are two. 32 CFR, the CMMC program rule, will be effective December 16th of 2024, which means that you will be able to, if you are looking for a certification assessment, you will be able to start the CMMC Level 2 certification assessment after the December 16th this year. Acquisition rule 48 CFR, we don't exactly know when it's going to come out, but it could be any day now. So once it's published, 60 days after the published date, we are expecting maybe later this year, maybe in December, or maybe in the Q1 of 2025, and then 60 days later, that's when the effective dates will kick in. Okay, and when the effective date kick in, that means CMMC rule is all finalized, totally finalized. Then CMMC rule will start. The CMMC final rule will start, and we'll go through some of the effective dates and what is the impact to you on how the rules will be rolled out in phases. Okay, so here are the questions that we are going to discuss today, and feel free to add additional questions in the Q&A.
Great. And again, thank you in advance for submitting a bunch of these questions. These are what are on your mind, so we're going to try to get to them all. So first question is for Layla. What are the key dates to know for CMMC Level 2 certification?
Yeah, and this is a great first question because essentially Kyle already covered what those dates or the specific rules that those dates are attached to. And so the first one is, as Kyle just mentioned, that December 16, 2024 is right up upon us. And that is the effective date of the CMMC program rule, which is, again, the 32 CFR Part 170. Starting from this date, defense contractors and subcontractors can begin obtaining their CMMC Level 2 certification assessments from the C3PO of their choice. I know that many C3POs are getting full already, starting at the end of this year and certainly into the beginning of next year. So that is the first key date that we're looking at right now, which is, again, right around the corner, right on us. The second really key date would be the second rule that Kyle just talked about, which is the CMMC acquisition rule, or the 48 CFR. As Kyle stated, that rule is about to be published. Again, we're expecting it to be between now and the end of the year or Q1 2025. The key date here is 12 months after that rule is effective. We will see the DoD start including those certification requirements in the contracts. So again, remember, as Kyle stated, that 48 CFR is for contracting officers. So that's when you'll see the organizations within the DoD creating that verbiage and narrative in acquisitions and contracts.
That's great. Thank you for that, Layla. So there's a lot of question around this third party versus self-assessment, and people are wondering which one should they do. Kyle, what do you recommend for question number 2?
Yeah, so if you have a CMMC Level 2 certification, or do you need to do a certification, or can you actually do the self-assessment? Because obviously everyone wants to do self-assessment, but it's not really up to the organization seeking certification or assessments. It really depends on the DoD contract, right? Contracting officers, they have to decide. So if you are a prime contractor, you have to follow what is specified in the solicitation or within your DoD contract. If you are lucky enough that the contract is for self-assessment, then great. But there are less than 2% of all the contracts that will allow for self-assessment. So yeah, I would say don't give too much hope that you will get a self-assessment for the DoD contracts. Most likely, if you're handling CY, you will need to get a third-party certification assessment. If you are a subcontractor, you really have to talk to your prime contractors to see if self-assessment is an option. If your prime contractors they are not getting a self-assessment for the contract, most likely as a subcontractor, you will not get a self-assessment for the CMMC Level 2.
Very good. Thank you, Kyle.
Sure.
So we've heard a lot about the lead up to a CMMC Level 2 certification assessment and just how long it takes. And we want to prepare people well in advance so that they can plan ahead and really know how long this process is going to take. So, Layla, maybe you can walk us through the breakdown of the timeline there.
Yeah, absolutely, Kelly. So all level 2 CMMC certification assessments conducted by C3POs will be following the CMMC assessment process document, otherwise known as the CAP. And I state that because it is a formal and prescribed process. However, processes and timelines may still vary slightly between C3PAOs. So I'll talk to KLC's process. Our process from phase 1 or pre-assessment to issuing an actual assessment result takes about 3 months. If the organization seeking assessment and certification has no POAM deficiencies. And I'll break that down a little more. Typically, our KLC's pre-assessment starts about 7 weeks before the agreed upon certification assessment interviews begin, and pre-assessment forms, intake forms, etc., are usually owed to us about 4 weeks or a month out before the certification assessment officially begins. Once that assessment begins, that process in itself, the assessment, the interviews, the write-ups, is another 4-week process to plan and execute. And then typically another 4 weeks to write our reports, to upload those reports into the EMAS system, and then to have the DoD review it. Sometimes there'll be some back and forth between the DoD PMO and the C3PO, but once all questions are resolved, the DoD will upload the formal assessment into the SPRS database. So again, I've outlined kind of 3-4 week processes that are equaling about 3 months. If you do obtain a conditional or certification, level 2 certification, meaning that you do have POAM deficiencies, you really want to think about that additional 180 days at the maximum time that you would need to close out that POAM. So typically 3 to 4 months if there's no POAM.
Great.
Yeah, and I also want to just mention that even though there are 180 days, you really want to probably do it before 150 days, because there are some additional processes that C3PO need to do to upload the results to DoD, and the DoD, they still have additional work to do to post your information to the SPRS, as what Layla was indicating earlier. So yeah, give yourself plenty of time. Don't wait until the last minute.
That's
right. That's a good point.
Yeah, that's a really important point. So we're going to move on to something that many fear. And this is a real pain point for a lot of small to mid-sized companies. What if I don't get at least the minimum score of an 88 during my CMMC level 2 certification assessment? What happens then? Kyle, can you walk us through what that looks like?
Yeah, so if you unfortunately did not get a minimum score of 88, which is the required score for you to get a conditional certification, right? Meaning that you have additional POAM items, the plan of action and milestone items, right? You need to resolve. Unfortunately, if you do not meet the minimum requirements of 88 points, then you will need to start over the assessment, the entire assessment. So you will need to go through the process again. So hopefully you have enough preparation and you don't get into this situation. So when you are preparing for your assessment, don't just shoot for the 88 points, because if something goes wrong, then you will fall below that 88 points, then you'll have to start over.
Really important to know. And then what if you get at least a minimum score of 88 or higher? Then what happens?
Yeah, I think we just talked a little bit earlier that if you have a minimum score of 88, then that means you have as a C3PAO, we will give you a conditional certification. That means you have 180 days, like we just talked about, to resolve all your remediate all your deficiencies, and also post that results to SPRS. We're not talking about just remediating. We're talking about 180 days. The DoD, they have to see your SPRS results in the SPRS system, right? So that's why you have to get a score of 110. Right, and you will get one chance to get your poem closed out. So you just want to make sure that you have all your poem items resolved before you start that closed out assessment. Obviously, you want to avoid to having too many deficiencies, right? The gaps during the assessment. So you just want to make sure that, do enough preparation. And if you are not too sure what's going to look like, we also offer a mock assessment before the official assessment. That means that before we do these official CMMC level 2 certification assessment, during this mock assessment, we will conduct the assessment just like as we will conduct the official assessment. The only difference is between the mock assessment and the regular those readiness assessment is that we will not give you consulting. We will not give you any ideas on how to remediate these conditions. We'll let you know what the problem, what those gaps are, what those deficiencies are, but we're not going to tell you. So if you are not too sure, if you want to take advantage of having a mock assessment first, it will give you a higher confidence of getting a better score during the real official assessment.
And I think that's really good advice, Kyle, because first of all, these assessments, they cost money, number one, and they take time. So if you want to try to improve your chances and ensure that you are clearing up any of these deficiencies and improving your confidence level and your capabilities, it makes sense to do this mock assessment to really fully be prepared so that you can go through it without the extra expense and time should you not reach the 110 score.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, so that's really great advice.
Yeah. I also want to just talk about the 32 CFR just briefly. 32 CFR final rule, they introduced a few other terms, right, on the deficiencies, the type of deficiencies. What we were talking about is plan of action and milestone poem deficiencies. Those are the deficiencies that must be closed out within 180 days, right? If you have control that are not fully implemented or missing some of the assessment objectives, then you will have a poem item. And those must be completed, must be remediated within 180 days, right? There's a term, operational plan of action. That means that if you have implemented the controls, and those are deemed deemed that meeting the requirement, the CMMC, the NIST 800-171 requirements, but now you have some vulnerabilities that you discovered within your operation, right? Say firewall, they need to have a firmware update. Then you can file a operational plan of action that's allowed for the CMMC. We're not talking about the poem items. We're talking about when you're during the operation, you will be able to say missing patches, need to apply patches, missing vulnerabilities. You identify new vulnerabilities need to be resolved, need to be patched. Those are operational plan of action. And during exception, that means like if you have that's allowed. And during exception, these are, for example, if you have if you are a manufacturer for medical devices, right, and some of the testing tools that have operating operating system within these tools, and these tools must be certified by FDA, for example, the Federal Food and Drug Administration. Right? You can apply the patch to the vulnerable operating system, because then it will notify the validity of some of the testing tools. That's so you just need to make sure that when this type of situation occurs, some of the testing equipments, if you're a manufacturer for aerospace, some of the equipments could be from 1980s, 70s, right? These are very old. There's no way you can upgrade the operating system. So in this situation, you have to put together a plan and say, this is how we are going to secure these environments, maybe put them into a separate network, or say we treat it in a special way to secure these devices. There, you just need to document them in the SSP, System Security Plan. There is no operational plan of action required. Then there's the temporary deficiency. The example I can give you is that if there is a firmware that has the FIPS validation, firewall firmware, that already have the FIPS validation, but the firewall manufacturer release a new firmware version, say go from 1.0 to 2.0. 2.0 will require another 18 months to get the FIPS validation. In that situation, you will file a temporary deficiency and put it into follow your operational plan of action. Then that's allowed within the CMMC program, because you just follow the process you documented within your system security plan, and documented your plan of action, and then keep track of the remediation. If there are remediation that's becomes available, then you will apply those remediation. So those are allowed. So these are just some differences between the terminology, the definitions of the deficiencies.
Okay, good to know. So we're going to move on to question number 6 now. As a prime company, what might we need from our subcontractors to comply with CMMC? And Layla, I'm going to call on you to take this one.
Okay, sure. So this is kind of a broad question, and so I'm going to answer it as specifically as I can. The short answer here really is, if you have a contract with DFARS clauses that requires level 2 CMMC certification, and you are working with subcontractors that are also handling CUI on that contract, then that subcontractor also needs to be CMMC certified. I think that's the short answer, right? Because according to 48 CFR, before awarding a contract to a subcontractor, you must verify that your CMMC subcontractor also has a current CMMC certification status. So, that flow down is a 1-to-1 for CMMC. This is slightly different than MSPs, right, or managed service providers. And so I just wanted to bring that up because the question's kind of high level. Managed service providers, while being part of a prime or subcontractor scope, do not at this time require a formal CMMC certification, although your managed service provider would be part of your assessment team and in scope, right? So that's just to clarify, we're talking subcontractors, not managed service providers.
Great. Excellent. And the DoD contractors and subcontractors, they need to verify that the subcontractor has a current CMMC certification, not older than 3 years, right? So being current is within that 3-year period. Is that accurate to say, Layla?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So it's not, CMMC will never be a one and done, right? You'll always be needing to get recertified every 3 years. And that is why we are seeing a lot of the larger primes sending out surveys to the subcontractors. Because it is in part a responsibility there that if you have partners that you know you'll be working with or continue to be working with once CMMC goes live, then it's a good idea now to make sure that those partners, subcontractors, are also prepared and working towards CMMC. So
I just want to add that there is a annual affirmation process for the affirmation official within the company. Whether you are prime or sub, you need to do this process to keep the CMMC certification current, right? So if you are CMMC level 2, if you don't do the annual affirmation, or if you miss the deadline for getting the annual affirmation, then your certification will consider lapsed, then the contract will be in jeopardy. So yeah, just want to make sure that as a contractor, they will also make sure there's contractor information.
Okay, that's a good distinction. Thank you, Kyle. So Layla, following up on that, we'll move on to number 7. Are the CMMC requirements only for new contracts?
no, so CMMC is going to be, the full rollout will be phased. It will be a phased out approach. So we'll start seeing CMMC requirements in new solicitations and contracts, but also in option years for existing contracts. So absolutely going to be both. And per the phase rollout, it basically is a year rollout from the publication of the rule, and then another year rollout. So full implementation looks like about 3 years to encompass all new and existing contracts. But that really is a guide. It will depend on your specific client, DoD client, on how they will add CMMC to those option years as well.
Very good. And Kyle, this is for you, number 8. Can we continue using our IT service provider and still comply with CMMC level 2 certification requirements?
Yeah, so Layla mentioned a little bit about the MSP. So these IT service providers, that's when we consider these are managed service providers. So these, in the rule, they make it a little bit confusing. It's an external service provider that is not cloud service provider. So they're in this category. So yes, you will still be able to use your IT service provider, providing that if they are doing some work for you. So let me just go back. If they are doing some work for you, and that the IT service providers, they do not store any on their premise. That means that they are not doing your backup. They are not keeping a backup of your CUI in their premise. In that case, you just need to include your IT service providers within your scope when the assessors come to assess your environment, and doing the interview, understanding how the process works. You need to include your own process and also the IT service providers' processes. Right, so you want to create a customer share the responsibility metrics with your IT service provider, and identify which part is done by you, the organization seeking certification, and which part is done by the IT organization. So, give you an example: if you have if you need to create a new user, usually is you. If you are the organization seeking certification, usually it's you, providing who you're going to grant this access to. You are going to be the one that approve, right, giving the authorization on which accounts are going to be created. But then the IT service provider, IT support organization, they are going to be the one that create the account. right? So there's a distinction in terms of the roles and responsibilities. So you need to distinguish what roles and what's the responsibilities are between you and your IT service providers. If your organization, so say if your IT service provider, if they do handle CUI for you, then you definitely need to make sure that you include them as well, and the detail, all the how they actually handle these CUI for you in your SSP in very detail, because it will be assessed looking closely by the assessor.
All right. Thank you for that clarification. Good to know. Moving on to number 9, we're a small company and recently submitted a score of a -50 to the SPRS system. What do you recommend we do to achieve a passing score? And I'm going to have Layla answer this one for us.
Sure. So with the understanding that to achieve a final CMMC level 2 certification, not a conditional, but a final, that you must have that perfect score in the SPRS of 110, right? So many companies are bringing on a subject matter expert to their internal IT or security team that perhaps is a certified CMMC professional or CCP or even a CCA, bringing someone like that to your existing security team on staff to help them prepare for CMMC. If you're a company who, again, using this example of a small company and perhaps don't have the budget to bring on a CMMC staff to your security team, I'd recommend hiring a CMMC consultant to guide you through preparing for CMMC. If you go out to the Cyber AB marketplace, there's a listing of registered practitioner organizations or RPOs. However, many C3POs also do consulting work. KLC is one of them. We do assessment and consulting work. But all to say, the process from getting to a -50 to 110 in the SPRS, getting that score up, is going to require time, effort, of course, the financial investment, and ultimately support from your senior management. And so you really want to ensure that your senior management understands the importance of CMMC certification. If your company is currently pursuing DoD contracts or subcontracts or plans to. And I just kind of wanted to add to this. I've been looking a little bit at the Q&A, the live Q&A, and we'll go over them at the end of this, I'm sure. But I think there was a question that I saw come in that said, if we are a company where our employees handle CUI, at what point do we have to train them? I think to some degree, this goes with that support from senior management, because it becomes a culture within your organization. And so the answer to that is upon hire and then annually, right? And so it does become the culture of your organization to make sure that your staff is trained on CUI.
Good point. Yeah, and I think this is a really good time to just point out another related thing here where this is happening as of December. This is coming up really fast. And for the folks on the webinar today, there are 77,000 defense industrial-based companies in the United States. So there's 77,000. And there are less than 75 C3PAOs. So the point is here, it's really important to queue up to get an assessment, to do the things now, get yourself on the list, get yourself in. I know KLC, this is not a sales pitch, but we really do believe that there will be a bottleneck here in the system in order to have this assessment done and to get you ready. And now is the time to do that. So just want to put that out there as we're talking about this, and it all relates to particularly small to mid-sized companies and trying to speak to senior management and get themselves in a ready position. Now is the time to do that, because it will be tough as time progresses here. So thank you for that. Moving on to number 10.
Before we move on, so I saw there I saw there was another question from the chat, from the FAQ. So if you have a score that is not accurate, or if you have an improvement of your score, you can always go into the SPRS to update your score. So there's not really any concern there, because you just want to make sure that, whenever you have a score, maybe it was put it as 110, but in reality, you found out it's actually going to be like 60. Yeah, it's okay for you to just adjust that the SPI score. So make sure that it's reflected to your existing current status.
Okay, great. Number 10, can an organization with multiple sites theoretically achieve one CMMC certification for all locations and cage codes? Or will each location need its own assessment? I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, but Kyle, if you can help explain the difference here.
Sure. Yeah. So for you to have one certification or multiple cage code entities, that means that you need to have the proper cage code hierarchy, right? So you need to have all these cage code you want to have put it into one certification, report to the same highest level owner, HLO, right? So if you don't have that hierarchy set up, then you are not going to be able to put in all the different cage codes under the certification, because the certification, the SPRS system, it's pulling the information, the cage code information from SAM.gov or cage.dla.gov.mil. So you need to go into SAM.gov. That's where you input all the information about your organization, your subsidiaries, your cage codes, right? Find out all the cage codes and determine the immediate, there's something called immediate level ownership, right? Immediate level owner, and also who is your highest level owner. Just make sure that you have that hierarchy set up in place. If you have so let's just say you have all the hierarchy properly set up, and different entities, they might be sharing the same corporate network, IT network, and they are managed by the same people, right? Then you are really managed by the same organization. In that case, yeah, there's no issue to have them put all into one certification, because you can justify that, yeah, there's only one certification, the policies, procedures, the SSPs, the procedures, the SOPs all apply across the controls, the requirements all apply across to different cage codes. However, if you have a few cage codes that are totally separate, they're running on totally separate network, managed by a totally separate group, in that case, you might want to have a separate certification for those situations, so for those cage codes, because they're not operating under the same network, and that they might be running under different standard operating procedures. So yeah, so just want to mention that.
Well, that was great you mentioned that, Kyle, because you kind of answered question number 11, which is if you have a parent company with two subsidiary companies, the parent company does not have a cage code, would it be okay for the subsidiary company A be the parent of a subsidiary company B to avoid creating a cage code for the parent company? So if you want to elaborate on that, that'd be great. Okay.
Yep. So, and again, these are all depends on the hierarchy, because if you don't have the hierarchy set up properly, there are going to be consequences, right? Because if you say you have your parent company does not have a cage code, or you have a subsidiary A and the subsidiary B, company A and company B as a subsidiary. And if you have, say, we don't want to create the parent cage code for the parent company, and we just want to have the company, subcompany B report to subcompany A, that means subcompany A right now is the higher level ownership of company B, right? So you really want to make that, look into the hierarchy and to see if that is how you want to set up, because that's going to be how the government see your hierarchy, right? If you have the higher owner, if a company A, if a company B, subcompany B reports to, reports to the subcompany A, that means, subcompany B let me just go back. Subcompany A is the higher level ownership of subcompany B. So from that hierarchy, there are going to be three, in reality, there are going to be three different levels. There's a parent company, and then there's company A and company B. Company B is going to be reported to company A, and company A is going to be reported to the parent company. So company A and company B, they are now no longer be at the same hierarchy level. So we want to make sure that you have the hierarchy defined properly. So you will be able to, when you're putting together your certification, you will have an understanding in terms of how your CMMC level 2 certification will be put together.
Okay, great. And we've got a burning question here in the Q&A that while we're on this topic, I want to cover. The question is, so is everyone just making up their own CUI training? This is my biggest issue. Nothing from our customers says CUI specifically. So how do we know what they are giving us is CUI? Can you answer that?
Sure. Yep. So in terms of what is CUI, feel free to jump in, Layla. So in terms of the CUI, if it's not specified CUI, if you know it's CUI and it's not marked, you still have to treat it as CUI based on the 32 CFR Part 2002, right? But it's really the government's responsibility to mark the document as CUI. It's not the contractor's responsibility. So if you are not too sure, if you have any questions, you really need to go back to the contracting officer to find out if the documents that you are handling, processing, store, or transmit, if they are CUI. In the past, it is very difficult to get them to clarify because the contracting officers, they're probably less knowledgeable because there are so many details in terms of like what is CUI. I would say like with the CMMC, the rule, the 32 CFR, the 48 CFR, and based on what we have seen, seems like there are a lot more training happening within the DoD, within the government itself. So I would say that, yeah, it will. I think if you reach out to the contracting officers, they will have a better answer. If they don't, they will provide you with some contacts that you can reach out. Layla, what do you see?
Yeah, I would agree with everything you said, Kyle, and just add that there's two topics here in a way. There's CUI training, which I did put the DoD's CDSC training in the chat. There's also marking. So the training is a requirement. The marking is a requirement. If you go out to the NARA website, there's a really good job marking aid. I recommend to my clients that they follow that, right, and incorporate the guidance that is in that marking guide with their internal guidance. And if you have a DoD client that's sending you unmarked CUI, you need to let them know that they need to be following the NARA marking guide, right? And because they're the data or information owner of that information. But that's all I would really add there. But yeah. And it does happen. We see that it happens a lot, to Kyle's point, but knowing that the contracting officers are getting more training and that these rules are coming out with more specific language, I think, we can hope that we'll see it less and less.
Very good. So Layla, if you want to continue on to question 12 here, we're an MSP and do not process or transmit any CUI when working with OSAs or OSCs, would we be considered in scope or out of scope?
That's a good question. If you're an MSP that your client is an organization seeking assessment or certification, right? You're still going to be responsible for certain requirements. If you handle change management processes, if you are providing security protection assets or security protection data, right, which is a new term with CMMC, or if you're connecting your computers to your client's IT systems, you're still essentially in scope. Again, it doesn't mean that you must obtain a CMMC certification. However, I do speak with MSPs lately that have decided, based on their client base, based on the breadth of the different OSC clients that they have decided to get a CMMC certification because there's clear benefits to doing this. And if you're an MSP who gets a CMMC certification, then that takes less responsibility from your team during the actual assessment, because essentially your clients can inherit controls from you. So then you can put together a shared responsibility matrix or matrices with your client, and then potentially not have to participate in each of your client certification assessments. So just to kind of summarize that, yes, you're in scope. And if you decide to pursue a CMMC certification, level 2 certification, then perhaps you take some staffing off. And again, it's definitely a advantage and benefit to have that CMMC certification for reciprocity for your clients.
Right. I'm going to jump to a question here in the Q&A. I understand that assessors need to follow the CAP, but is there a potential for different assessors to require more evidence for controls/objectives? Who would like to take that one?
I can feel free to jump in, Leila. In terms of the number of the evidence that the assessor will look for, I think it all depends on the background, because assessors have different background, but they all follow CAP, and also most likely will use the assessment guide as a guideline in terms of reviewing the evidence, right, the support documents that you provide. So yeah, they are going to slightly change in terms of the background, based on the background of the assessor, but hopefully it's not going to be different to differentiate too much.
Great. And now we're going to jump to some additional questions that were submitted in advance. And here's one that is forefront on everybody's mind. And Leila, maybe you can answer this one. How much does a CMMC Level 2 certification assessment with a C3 PAO cost?
Well, that's a great question. And the overall answer is that depends. It depends on the size and scope of your organization. It depends if you are doing exercising or utilizing an enterprise-wide CUI certification for your entire organization, or if you've implemented a CUI enclave and therefore are inheriting many of your controls from that enclave or cloud solution potentially. I will say that KLC Consulting has a very easy tool on our website. I don't know if Kelly or Kyle, if you want to put it into the chat, but it is essentially a pretty close to instant level 2 assessment price quote after answering just a few questions about your organization. And so, yeah, without throwing out numbers, it really just kind of depends on the complexity and scope of your organization.
Very good. Yes, and we will put that form in the chat in just a moment. And while we're doing that, Leila, what is the earliest date I can schedule my CMMC Level 2 assessment? with KLC Consulting, of course, but what is the earliest date that one can schedule?
So yeah, just going back to the 32 CFR, C3POs, including KLC Consulting, of course, can begin scheduling and performing CMMC level 2 assessments as of December 16th of this year, of 2024. Right now, we're not seeing any indication that that date could push back. And a couple factors in there that would potentially cause that date to shift to the right. Is the CMMC instance of EMAS wouldn't be ready, but right now we're not seeing any indication of that. I think there's actually training out for C3POs before the end of the year, or before the December 16th date. And the other thing that could potentially push that date back is if the certification assessment process, the CAP, isn't finalized. But again, we're not seeing that risk at this time. It seems like everything is moving along as it should. So all to say, yeah, December 16th of 2024. If you are concerned of a date, that date getting pushed back, then maybe recommend that Q1 2025.
Great. Excellent. And moving right along, I've heard conflicting views regarding the storage of FIPS validated encryption of backups being stored in FedRAMP moderate clouds. Some people state that if it's FIPS encrypted, then it's not CUI anymore, and that it can be in any cloud storage, which is accurate. Kyle, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So based on my understanding, right, if you are using a cloud-based backup solution, that means they are doing the backup for you, right? They have access to the unencrypted information first, then they do the backup. That means they will have access to the actual encrypted CUI. So in that case, yeah, you need to have a FedRAMP certified cloud the backup service provider, cloud-based service provider. However, if you just back up everything yourself, right? You own the key. You back up you back up the CUI into a file. You own the key, and nobody else have the key to decrypt the file. Then that file becomes just a ciphertext, and you will be able to store it somewhere.
Okay, great. And along those lines, Kyle, if the backup of CUI is FIPS encrypted, is it okay to store at a third-party facility such as Iron Mountain?
Yeah, I would say so, because we just have to make sure that nobody else actually have the key to decrypt, right? Other than you, then you will be able to just store that file offsite.
All right, and here is a question about closeout assessment. What is the process for a closeout assessment? Am I only allowed one POEM reassessment during the 180-day conditional certification period? We touched on this earlier, but let's further clarify that. Kyle, do you want to take that one? It's about the closeout assessment.
Yeah, so I think we touched earlier. So closeout assessment, yes, will only allow one chance to have the POEM closeout assessment, within 180 days. Yeah, so you just need to plan ahead and make sure that I would suggest to just do the POEM assessment, POEM closeout assessment before 150-day mark. So give yourself enough time to have that information uploaded to the SPRS.
Okay, great. And then how do I know if my CMMC requirement flows down to my subcontractors? Who would like to take that? Kyle or Layla? Feel free to jump in on the CMMC requirement flow downs to my subcontractors.
Yeah, so there's definitely a requirements. There's a requirement, so it all depends on the information that you pass to your subcontractor. So whether it's level 1 or level 2, Yeah, so you have to first determine, right, which subcontractors are getting my information, and what type of information are they getting. Then you have a requirements, for flowing down to the subcontractors, because DoD, they are going to be look very closely based on the proposed rule of 48 CFR. They're going to be very strict and very careful in terms of how the information is flowed down. And every system, subcontractors, they're handling the CUI or the FCI, they will get what they call the DoD unique ID for the system they use to handle the FCI or CUI. So the DoD, they want the prime contractors to keep track of those IDs, and the DoD themselves, the contracting officers, they will track those certification, the validity of those certifications.
Yeah, and I would just add there that, and I think this was a discussion or a question in the chat when I was looking at it a little while ago. The flow down is a requirement, when you really kind of take a step back and look logically. Is your subcontractors handling, processing, or storing FCI or CUI? If you have a subcontractor that's only viewing CUI and it does not enter their environment at all, that same contractor is not creating any CUI, then the flow down requirement wouldn't be a requirement, right? So I just want to make sure we're still kind of exercising that common logical sense here of it's coming back to the data, whether that's data is federal contract information, level 1 CMMC, or controlled unclassified information, level 2 CMMC.
Great. That's really good to know. So we've covered a lot of territory, and thank you both for highlighting what we really need to know. These are a lot of the questions that KLC Consulting gets a lot of, and it's great to be able to answer these with two leading experts in the field. And thank you all for joining us today. I hope you learned a lot, have a lot of takeaways. And again, we will be sending out the recording of the webinar along with the downloadable toolkit on pretty much demystifying the CMMC certification process for you. And be sure to reach out to us via email if you have any follow-up questions, or if you would like a copy of this PowerPoint, we're happy to share that with you as well. Just email us at cmmc@klcconsulting.net. Again, cmmc@klcconsulting.net, and we'd be happy to answer more of your questions and share whatever toolkits we have available for you. So enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you again for attending the webinar. It was great to see you.
Thanks,
Thank you
Kelly.
so much.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.